Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In a heart-wrenching twist, young Ekundayo faces the ultimate battle not just against an ancient, malevolent darkness threatening his village, but within himself as the shadow takes root in his soul. As his mother Akanni and elder Baba Adisa struggle to reach the boy they once knew, the stakes rise to a devastating crescendo where love, sacrifice, and the will to overcome despair are all that stand between salvation and total destruction. The story takes viewers on an emotional rollercoaster as Ekundayo's fight against the encroaching darkness becomes a poignant reflection of courage, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The journey is fraught with unimaginable challenges, but the outcome will leave a lasting impact on the hearts of those who witness it. The final moments are a powerful blend of triumph and bittersweet sorrow, ensuring the story's grip on the audience until the very last frame. Ekundayo was a curious boy of 12 who lived in the quiet village of Akanni. The village was surrounded by a dense forest that the villagers rarely entered. They spoke of ancient spirits and creatures that lurked within, and children were warned never to wander too far. But Ekundayo's curiosity often got the best of him. One late afternoon, while gathering firewood near the edge of the forest, Ekundayo saw something that made his heart race. Among the trees, he glimpsed a shadowy figure, tall and dark, with glowing red eyes. The figure moved swiftly between the trees and then disappeared into the darkness. Ekundayo stood frozen, his hands trembling as he dropped the bundle of firewood. He ran back to the village as fast as his legs could carry him, breathless and scared. When he reached home, he told his mother what he had seen, but she only hushed him and told him not to speak of such things. "The forest is not a place for children," she said, her voice laced with fear. "Do not go there again." But Ekundayo couldn't forget the shadow. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about it over and over. What was it? Why did it seem to be watching him? The more he thought about it, the more he felt a strange pull toward the forest, as if something was calling him. Days passed, but the image of the shadow haunted his thoughts. He felt compelled to go back to the forest, despite the warnings. He had to know what it was, even if it meant facing the unknown. Ekundayo's curiosity grew stronger each day. The memory of the shadowy figure and its glowing red eyes wouldn't leave him. One morning, when the village was still waking up, Ekundayo decided he couldn't wait any longer. He had to return to the forest. He quietly left his home and made his way back to the place where he had seen the shadow. The forest was thick with mist, and the trees towered over him like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, and every sound seemed to echo in the stillness. As he walked, Ekundayo noticed a narrow path he hadn't seen before. It was overgrown with vines and brambles, as if no one had walked there in years. He hesitated for a moment, remembering the stories the villagers told about the forbidden paths deep within the forest. But his curiosity was stronger than his fear. He stepped onto the path, pushing aside the vines. The farther he walked, the darker it became. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches intertwining like fingers. The air grew colder, and strange whispers filled his ears, though he couldn't understand the words. As he continued, the path became more twisted and difficult to follow. The ground beneath his feet felt strange, as if it were alive and shifting. But Ekundayo pressed on, determined to find the truth about the shadow he had seen. Suddenly, the path opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood a large stone altar, covered in strange symbols that seemed to glow faintly. Ekundayo felt a chill run down his spine. The air around the altar was thick with an unnatural energy, and he could sense that something powerful resided there. But before he could take another step, a deep, rumbling voice echoed through the clearing. "Who dares to disturb the sacred path?" it boomed. Ekundayo's heart pounded in his chest. He was not alone. The voice echoed through the clearing, causing Ekundayo to freeze in his tracks. His eyes darted around, trying to find the source of the voice, but there was no one in sight. Just as he was about to turn and run, the ground beneath the altar began to tremble. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows behind the altar. It was tall and imposing, with dark, leathery skin and eyes that glowed like embers. The creature had the body of a man but was covered in scales, and its hands ended in long, sharp claws. It stepped forward, its gaze fixed on Ekundayo. "I am the guardian of the altar," the creature said in a voice that was both deep and ancient. "This is sacred ground, protected by the spirits of the forest. None may pass without my permission." Ekundayo's heart pounded in his chest, but he knew he couldn't back down now. "I seek the truth," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I saw a shadow in the forest, and it called to me. I need to know what it is." The guardian studied Ekundayo for a long moment, its eyes narrowing. "The truth is not meant for the eyes of mortals," it said finally. "But if you are determined, you may proceed. However, be warned, the path ahead is filled with darkness and peril. Once you begin, there is no turning back." Ekundayo nodded, his resolve unwavering. The guardian stepped aside, allowing him to approach the altar. As he did, the symbols on the stone began to glow more brightly, illuminating the clearing with an eerie light. "Place your hand on the altar," the guardian instructed. "If your heart is pure and your will strong, you will be granted passage. But if there is doubt or fear within you, the spirits will consume you." Ekundayo swallowed hard and placed his hand on the cold stone. The moment he did, a surge of energy shot through him, filling him with a strange sensation. His vision blurred, and the world around him seemed to dissolve into darkness. When the darkness lifted, Ekundayo found himself standing in a different place altogether. The forest was gone, replaced by a vast, barren landscape that stretched out as far as the eye could see. The sky above was dark, and the air was thick with the scent of burning. Ekundayo knew he had crossed into another realm, one filled with dangers he could not yet comprehend. Ekundayo looked around in awe and fear at the strange new world he had entered. The landscape was desolate, with jagged rocks and twisted trees that looked more dead than alive. The sky was a deep, unnatural purple, and the sun was nowhere to be seen. Shadows moved across the ground, seeming to have a life of their own. As Ekundayo walked, he could feel the weight of the realm pressing down on him. The air was thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Every step he took echoed loudly in the eerie silence, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the horizon. It was a tall, thin man dressed in a long, tattered robe. His face was hidden beneath a hood, and he moved with an unnatural grace, almost gliding across the ground. Ekundayo instinctively reached for a stone on the ground, ready to defend himself if necessary. The figure stopped a few feet away from Ekundayo and lowered his hood. The man's face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and glowing with a faint blue light. He looked at Ekundayo with a mixture of curiosity and pity. "You are not from this world," the man said in a voice that was soft but carried an air of authority. "What brings you to the realm of shadows?" "I'm looking for the truth," Ekundayo replied, his voice trembling slightly. "I saw a shadow in the forest, and it led me here. I need to know what it is and why it's calling me." The man nodded slowly, as if he understood. "The shadow you seek is a powerful spirit, one that has been bound to this realm for centuries. It seeks a mortal host to carry out its will in the world of the living. You have been chosen." Ekundayo's heart skipped a beat. Chosen for what? To become the vessel for the spirit, the man replied. It will grant you power beyond your imagination, but it will also consume you if you are not strong enough to control it. Ekundayo felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of gaining such power was tempting, but he also knew the dangers that came with it. How do I control it? He asked. The man smiled faintly. You must face the spirit in its true form and prove your strength. If you succeed, you will gain its power. But if you fail, you will be lost to the darkness forever. Ekundayo nodded, determination filling his heart. I will face it. The man's smile faded, and he pointed to a distant mountain that loomed on the horizon. The spirit resides at the top of that mountain. The path is treacherous, and many have perished trying to reach it. But if you are truly determined, you may find what you seek. With those words, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Ekundayo alone once more. The mountain stood tall and ominous in the distance, but Ekundayo knew he had to reach it. His journey was far from over. The mountain towered above Ekundayo, its peak hidden by dark clouds that swirled ominously. The path leading to the top was narrow and steep, with jagged rocks and loose gravel that made every step treacherous. As Ekundayo began his ascent, the air grew colder, and the wind howled around him like a chorus of lost souls. With each step, the weight of the journey pressed harder on his shoulders. The shadows from the realm of shadows seemed to cling to him, making the climb even more difficult. The sky darkened further, and soon it was almost impossible to see the path ahead. Ekundayo's hands shook as he clung to the rocky ledges, trying to keep his balance. As he climbed higher, he began to hear whispers on the wind, faint, indistinct voices that seemed to come from all directions. They echoed in his mind, filling him with doubt and fear. Turn back, the voices whispered. You will never make it. The spirit will destroy you. Ekundayo tried to block out the voices, but they grew louder and more insistent. His heart pounded in his chest, and his legs felt like they were made of lead. For a moment he considered turning back, but then he remembered the shadow he had seen in the forest, the call that had brought him here. He couldn't give up now. He continued to climb, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The path became steeper, and the rocks sharper. At times, he had to crawl on his hands and knees to avoid slipping. The wind whipped around him, carrying with it the cold chill of the mountain's peak. Suddenly, the path ended at the edge of a deep chasm. On the other side, the path continued, leading up to the summit. But the gap was too wide to jump, and there was no bridge in sight. Ekundayo stared at the chasm, his heart sinking. Had he come this far only to be stopped by an impossible obstacle? As he stood there, the whispers grew louder, mocking him. You are weak. You cannot succeed. Turn back while you still can. But Ekundayo refused to listen. He knew he had to find a way across. He looked around, searching for something, anything, that could help him. His eyes fell on a large tree growing near the edge of the chasm, its roots clinging to the rocky soil. With a determined look, he began to pull at the tree's roots, trying to loosen them from the ground. It took all his strength, but eventually, the tree began to give way. With a final, mighty pull, the tree fell across the chasm, forming a makeshift bridge. The tree's branches creaked and groaned under the weight of the wind, but it held. Ekundayo carefully crawled across the tree, his heart pounding with fear. The wind buffeted him from all sides, and the tree swayed dangerously, but he kept going. When he finally reached the other side, he breathed a sigh of relief. The summit was within reach. But as he continued his climb, he knew the true test was yet to come. As Ekundayo neared the summit of the mountain, the air became thin and difficult to breathe. Each step felt like a monumental effort, but he pressed on, driven by the need to find the truth. The peak was shrouded in thick, swirling mist, and the shadows that clung to him seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. Finally, he reached the summit. The ground leveled out, and Ekundayo found himself standing in a wide, open space. The mist was so thick that he could barely see a few feet in front of him. But in the center of the clearing, he could make out a large stone pedestal, similar to the altar he had seen in the forest. As he approached the pedestal, the mist began to clear, revealing a dark, swirling figure hovering above the stone. It was the shadow he had seen in the forest, but now it was much larger and more menacing. Its eyes glowed with a fiery red light, and its form seemed to shift and twist as if made of smoke. "Ekundayo," the shadow hissed, its voice echoing through the air. "You have come far, but your journey is not yet over. If you wish to gain the power you seek, you must prove yourself worthy." Ekundayo swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. "What must I do?" he asked, his voice trembling. The shadow let out a low, menacing laugh. "You must face your darkest fears," it said. "Only then will you be strong enough to wield the power of the shadows." Before Ekundayo could respond, the ground beneath him began to tremble. The stone pedestal cracked and split open, and the shadowy figure surged toward him like a wave. Ekundayo tried to run, but the shadows enveloped him, pulling him into the darkness. He felt himself falling, spinning through a void of complete blackness. The air was thick and suffocating, and he couldn't see or hear anything. Panic set in as he realized he was completely alone, lost in the darkness. But then, out of the void, a voice echoed in his mind. It was his own voice, filled with doubt and fear. "You are not strong enough," it whispered. "You will fail. The shadows will consume you." Ekundayo tried to fight the voice, but it grew louder, drowning out all other thoughts. He could feel the darkness closing in on him, pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating him. But then, in the midst of the darkness, Ekundayo remembered the village of Akanni, his family, and the people he loved. He couldn't let the shadows win. He couldn't let fear control him. With all the strength he could muster, Ekundayo pushed back against the darkness. "I am not afraid," he shouted, his voice echoing through the void. "I will not be consumed by fear." The darkness around him began to recede, and the shadows weakened. Ekundayo could feel the power within him growing stronger as he faced his fears head-on. The void began to crack and shatter, and light broke through the darkness. When the void finally disappeared, Ekundayo found himself back on the summit of the mountain. The shadowy figure hovered above the pedestal, but it was no longer menacing. Its form was smaller, almost subdued. "You have proven yourself," the shadow said, its voice softer now. "You are stronger than fear. The power of the shadows is yours to command." Ekundayo felt a surge of energy fill his body. The power of the shadows flowed through him, giving him strength and confidence he had never known before. But he also knew that this power came with a heavy responsibility. The shadow bowed its head in acknowledgement of Ekundayo's victory. "Go now," it said. "Return to your world and use this power wisely. But remember, the shadows are always watching." With that, the shadow dissolved into the air, and the mist cleared. Ekundayo looked around and realized that the path back down the mountain had reappeared. He had faced his darkest fears and emerged victorious, but he knew that his journey was far from over. As Ekundayo descended the mountain, the power of the shadows coursed through his veins. The world around him seemed different, brighter, yet filled with a new depth of darkness he had never noticed before. He could sense the presence of spirits and shadows that had once been hidden from him. When he finally reached the base of the mountain, the landscape of the realm of shadows stretched out before him. The barren, twisted landscape that had seemed so frightening before now felt familiar, almost welcoming. The whispers of the shadows were still present, but they no longer filled him with fear. Instead, they seemed to acknowledge him as one of their own. Ekundayo knew he had to return to the village of Akanni, but he also knew that he was no longer the same boy who had left. The power of the shadows had changed him, and he wondered how the villagers would react when they saw him again. As he walked back through the forest, the trees seemed to part before him, creating a clear path. The creatures that had once lurked in the shadows now kept their distance, as if recognizing the power he wielded. Ekundayo felt a strange sense of pride, but he also knew that this power came with a responsibility he couldn't ignore. When he finally emerged from the forest and saw the familiar huts of Akanni, his heart swelled with emotion. He had made it back home. But as he approached the village, he noticed something strange. The villagers were gathered in the center of the village, their faces filled with fear and confusion. As Ekundayo entered the village, the people turned to look at him. For a moment, there was a stunned silence, and then the whispers began. "He's back," they murmured. "But something's different." His mother, Akanni, rushed forward, tears streaming down her face. "Ekundayo," she cried, embracing him tightly. "We thought you were lost forever." Ekundayo returned the embrace, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. "I'm here, mother," he said softly. "I'm here." But as he looked around, he could see the fear in the eyes of the villagers. They could sense the change in him, the power that now coursed through his veins. He was no longer just Ekundayo, the curious boy, he was something more, something that made the villagers uneasy. Baba Adisa, the village elder, stepped forward, his expression grave. "Ekundayo," he said in a low voice, "what have you done? What have you brought back with you?" Ekundayo looked at the elder, feeling the weight of his words. He had been through so much, faced his darkest fears, and now he stood before his people, changed. But he didn't fully understand what that change meant, not yet. "I sought the truth," Ekundayo replied, his voice steady. "And I found it. I have been given power, but I do not yet know all that it means." Baba Adisa's eyes narrowed as he studied Ekundayo. Power is a dangerous thing, especially when it comes from the shadows. The spirits of the forest are not to be trifled with. They do not give gifts lightly, and they always demand something in return. The villagers whispered among themselves, fear growing in their voices. Ekundayo could feel the distance growing between him and the people he had known all his life. He had returned, but he was no longer truly one of them. Before Baba Adisa could say more, a sudden darkness fell over the village. The sun, which had been shining brightly just moments before, was now obscured by thick, swirling clouds. The air grew cold, and a strange wind began to blow through the village, carrying with it the scent of decay. The villagers gasped and backed away as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same shadowy form that Ekundayo had faced on the mountain, but now it was even more menacing, its eyes burning with a fierce, red light. "You thought you could wield the power of the shadows without consequences," the figure hissed, its voice echoing through the village. "Foolish boy. You are bound to me now, and so is this village. You have brought the darkness upon them all." Ekundayo's heart sank as he realized what he had done. In his quest for truth and power, he had unwittingly unleashed a curse upon his village. The shadow had not been defeated, it had merely been waiting for the right moment to strike. The villagers screamed as the shadowy figure advanced, its darkness spreading like a stain across the ground. The huts began to crumble, and the once fertile land turned barren and lifeless. The shadow had come to claim its due, and there was nothing Ekundayo could do to stop it. Or was there? As the shadow reached out to claim the villagers, Ekundayo felt the power within him stir. He had been given the power of the shadows, but now he had to use it, not to conquer, but to protect. He had to find a way to save his village, even if it meant sacrificing himself. With a determined look, Ekundayo stepped forward, placing himself between the shadow and the villagers. "You will not have them," he said, his voice strong. "If you want them, you'll have to go through me." The shadow let out a chilling laugh. "Very well, boy. Let's see if you can withstand the full power of the darkness." And with that, the shadow surged forward, engulfing Ekundayo in a wave of darkness. As the darkness enveloped Ekundayo, he felt a crushing weight bearing down on him. The shadow's power was immense, far greater than he had anticipated. It sought to overwhelm him, to drown him in despair and fear. The voices of the shadows whispered in his mind, urging him to surrender, to let go of the fight. But Ekundayo knew that if he gave in, the village would be lost. The people he loved would be consumed by the darkness, and it would all be his fault. He couldn't allow that to happen. He had to fight. Drawing on the power within him, Ekundayo pushed back against the shadow, forcing it to retreat. The darkness around him wavered, and for a moment he thought he might have gained the upper hand. But the shadow was relentless, pressing forward with renewed fury. "You are strong, but not strong enough," the shadow hissed. "You are merely a vessel, a tool for my power. You cannot hope to control me." Ekundayo gritted his teeth, refusing to be intimidated. "I will not let you win," he said through clenched teeth. "This is my body, my mind. You cannot take it from me." But the shadow only laughed. "We shall see." Suddenly, the darkness around Ekundayo shifted, and he found himself in a strange, twisted version of his village. The huts were distorted, the trees gnarled and blackened, and the ground was cracked and barren. The villagers were there too, but they were different, ghostly figures with hollow eyes, their faces twisted in pain and fear. "Welcome to your future," the shadow said, its voice echoing all around him. "This is what will happen if you continue to resist. The village will fall, and its people will be lost to the darkness. It's already begun." Ekundayo looked around in horror. Could this really be what awaited his village if he failed? He could feel the doubt creeping into his mind, weakening his resolve. The shadow fed on that doubt, growing stronger with each passing moment. But then, through the haze of fear and despair, Ekundayo heard a voice, the voice that cut through the darkness like a beacon of light. It was his mother's voice, calling out to him. "Ekundayo, my son, you are stronger than this. You have always been strong. Do not let the darkness take you. Fight, Ekundayo. Fight for all of us." Her words filled Ekundayo with a renewed sense of purpose. He couldn't give up, not now, not ever. He had to protect his village, to save his people from the curse he had brought upon them. With a roar of determination, Ekundayo unleashed the full extent of his power. The darkness around him shuddered and cracked, the twisted village fading into nothingness. The shadow screamed in fury as Ekundayo's light burned through it, pushing it back into the depths from which it had come. But even as the shadow retreated, Ekundayo knew the battle was far from over. The shadow was part of him now, and it would never truly leave. He would have to fight it every day to keep it from taking control. As the darkness finally faded, Ekundayo found himself back in the real village. The villagers were huddled together, watching him with wide eyes, unsure of what had just happened. But the shadow was gone, for now. Ekundayo looked at Baba Adisa, who nodded in silent acknowledgement. The elder understood the burden Ekundayo now carried, but he also knew that the boy had the strength to bear it. The village was safe, but at what cost? The shadow had been pushed back, but the village of Akanni would never be the same. The land was scarred, the huts damaged, and the villagers were shaken to their core. They had seen the darkness that Ekundayo had brought back with him, and it left them uneasy, unsure of what the future held. Ekundayo stood in the center of the village, feeling the weight of their fear and mistrust. He had fought to protect them, but in doing so, he had also become a symbol of the very darkness he had battled against. The power of the shadows was still within him, and the villagers could sense it. Baba Adisa approached Ekundayo, his expression somber. "The village has been spared, but the people are afraid," the elder said quietly. "They do not understand the power you now hold, and they fear what it might bring." Ekundayo nodded, his heart heavy. He had gained incredible power, but at the cost of his connection to his people. The villagers kept their distance, whispering among themselves, their eyes filled with suspicion. "I never wanted this," Ekundayo said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to find the truth, to understand what was calling me." Baba Adisa placed a hand on Ekundayo's shoulder. "The truth is a heavy burden, and power is a dangerous gift. You have been given both, and now you must learn to carry them with wisdom." The elder's words were meant to be comforting, but they did little to ease Ekundayo's troubled mind. He could still feel the presence of the shadow within him, a constant reminder of the darkness he had unleashed. It whispered to him in the quiet moments, urging him to embrace its power, to let it consume him. But Ekundayo resisted. He knew that if he gave in, the shadow would take control, and the village would be lost. He had to find a way to balance the power within him, to keep the shadow at bay while still protecting his people. Days turned into weeks, and the village slowly began to rebuild. The villagers worked together to repair the damage done by the shadow, but the fear lingered. They avoided Ekundayo, unsure of how to interact with him. He was both a hero and a threat, a protector and a danger. Ekundayo spent most of his time alone, walking the outskirts of the village, away from the fearful glances and hushed whispers. He had become a stranger in his own home, a symbol of the darkness that had nearly consumed them all. The villagers rebuilt, but their trust in him was shattered, and he felt the weight of their isolation pressing down on him. One evening, as Ekundayo wandered near the forest's edge, he felt the familiar chill of the shadows creeping back into his thoughts. The darkness within him stirred, whispering insidious thoughts. He knew the shadow had not been fully defeated, it was still a part of him, and it craved power, hungering for the moment he would falter. Suddenly, Ekundayo heard a rustling in the bushes. He turned sharply, his senses heightened, expecting danger. But what emerged was not a beast or a spirit, it was a small girl, no older than 6, with wide, fearful eyes. She looked up at him with a mixture of awe and terror. "Are you the boy who fought the shadow?" she asked in a trembling voice. Ekundayo knelt down, trying to soften his expression. "Yes," he replied gently. "But I'm not someone to be afraid of." The girl hesitated, then stepped closer. "My mother says you have a dark power inside you. Is that true?" Ekundayo's heart ached at the words. "It's true," he admitted. "But I'm trying to use it to protect the village, not harm it." The girl nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something beyond her years. "My brother went into the forest and hasn't come back. Do you think the shadows took him?" Ekundayo felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday," the girl whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He said he was going to find something important. He said the shadows called him." Ekundayo's blood ran cold. The shadow's influence was spreading, reaching out to others in the village. It wasn't content with just him, it wanted more. It wanted to grow, to consume. "I'll find your brother," Ekundayo promised, his voice firm. "But you must stay here, with your family. The forest is dangerous." The girl nodded, wiping her tears. Ekundayo stood up, his mind racing. If the shadows were calling others, then the situation was far worse than he had realized. He had to find the boy and stop whatever darkness was spreading before it was too late. Will Ekundayo save the boy and stop the darkness from spreading? You will find out in the next episode.